On Tuesday of this week, the CBC president, Anthony Manera, resigned after announcing that the CBC's budget was being cut by $350 million. Mr. Manera is this morning in our studio in Ottawa. Tony, good morning.
Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Probably better than you.
Yes, I think so.
What was it like going into that floor of the Chateau Laurier for you this morning? I was there yesterday, and it had an impact on people's life. What did people say to you as you went into the place you're still in charge of?
Oh, they were very, very pleasant, and I detected a certain degree of sadness, which seems to exist throughout the corporation. I was very deeply touched.
Tell me about, your resignation letter. I've read the copy of what you sent to the Prime Minister, and it says, it's very gracious, and it says purely personal reasons. Yet it's difficult for anyone to look at it and not put two and two together with the timing with which you announced it. It isn't purely personal, surely?
Well, that depends on one's point of view. What happens to the CBC is very personal to me, and some people can't understand that. I've invested a tremendous amount of my energy, my life in the CBC. I love it very much. I think it's extremely valuable. And what happens to the CBC is very personal. So in that sense, the letter accurately describes my feelings. I'm still of the old school, which says that you make the best case you can, but when decisions are finally rendered by people in authority, you either accept them and live with them, or you do the honorable thing and resign. You don't make a fuss. So in my letter of resignation, it was not my intention to make a fuss and to protest. I tried to be constructive, and I was hoping that by simply saying personal reasons, that would be the end of that. But obviously, it didn't work out that way.
What was the single fact that crystallized in the resignation? Because no one expected there to be more money for the CBC. I don't know. I'd like to know how much you did know about the degree of the cuts that would come. I'd also like to hear you on whether there was a broken promise from Minister Dupuy, because I don't know if you heard my own conversation with the Prime Minister yesterday,
yes, I did.
In which he said if there were promises to you, he didn't make them and he didn't know about them. Were there?
Well, the Prime Minister never made any promise.
No, and it's never been suggested that he did.
But I will read you a copy of the news release that was issued on February 394 on the date of my appointment, and just the paragraph that applies to this. And it says, the minister confirmed that the government is pleased to announce that it does not intend to impose new cuts on the CBC over the next 5 years. So this was a statement made by the minister on behalf of the government, of government intentions. There was an interview with Don Newman on Newsworld on the same day at 7:30 p.m., during which, and I quote, Mr. Dupuy says, there would be no other cuts in the parliamentary appropriation to the CBC. And there is, a lot of additional letters and public statements that say essentially the same thing. So, of course, there was a promise of government intention. It was also included in the letter officially appointing me. And so people have to draw their own conclusion. But it was not made by the Prime Minister. It was made by Mr. Dupuy, but speaking on behalf of the government.
At what point did you know that undertaking would not be kept?
Well, it began, of course, in the summer of '94 when we were asked to conduct a program review, which involved, coming up with different scenarios of what would happen if you were cut so much and what would happen if you were cut another amount, and so on and so forth, which we found fairly depressing and traumatic, but nevertheless we went along with it. But at that time, Mr. Dupuy was good enough to keep me informed all the way. I had many meetings with him right through the summer and the fall. Every single meeting involved bringing me up to date as to what was happening behind the scenes, and it always ended with a statement by the minister that he was doing his best to minimize any cuts. and furthermore, that no decisions had been made. The decisions were still to be made. So as time progressed, however, it was pretty obvious that this was for real, and I don't know that there was any specific point where the message finally sunk in, but little by little it became more and more obvious that this was not a hypothetical scenario. This was for real, and that the efforts that certainly Mr. Dupuis appeared to be making, and other people in government, were not really bearing the fruit that we had hoped. And I would say about 3 or 4 weeks ago, the signals were sufficiently clear that there was no longer any doubt about the magnitude of the cuts, and it was just a matter of how they might be profiled and whether there would be a mandate review and things of that sort.
Yeah, but you were able to absorb all that information or those indications without tendering your resignation, and yet when it became clear in what was in the budget, you did resign. Much has been made of, not much has been made, but we hear talk of the return of the RCI, Radio Canada International, which had been under the aegis of external affairs, been paid for by them, and it was shipped back to you, saying, here you are, but the money that had been used for it didn't come with it, and I'm told that had a major, even though that's not nearly as many dollars as them, but that had a big impact on your decision.
Absolutely. This was totally, I was totally unprepared for that. It was a shock, a surprise, an hour and a half before the budget was tabled in the House. But at that point, there was still some confusion as to whether, at least for the coming year, there might be some money coming from external affairs. And so I did not get to the final decision until the following day, which clearly stated, no, you have to keep the service going, and you will not get the $15 million that you have been getting, and this comes right from the cabinet. So that was a big, big blow. I did not expect that, and it creates unbelievable problems for us as well as for the service.
And I want to ask you just about the resignation and the decision. It's a very moving one. I mean, we had, if you were listening to Morningside yesterday, it's nice to have you able to listen to it for a change. But you're listening to Morningside yesterday, you may also have heard the panel of 3 very smart guys we had come on talk about the future of the CBC from very different perspectives. A liberal who had been on the board, a conservative who's currently on the board, and Denny Harvey, who was a very important executive.
Yeah, I didn't hear that part, unfortunately.
Well, my first question was, should Tony Manera have resigned? They all said yes. Which surprised me. That they said it was and everyone expects the honor and integrity that you've shown. But at the same time, as you made the decision yourself, you had to say, maybe this place needs me. Maybe I should stay here now and see it through. An institution I understand, whose people like me and respect me. There's a statement from the Joint Union Committee that I guess was issued yesterday of their admiration for. They said here was a guy we could work with instead of being worked against. So you had to say to yourself, well, they're going to cut it and I can't stop it. Maybe I should stay and do the best I can to make what the best institution we can out of lesser money. You must have thought about that.
Oh, absolutely. You really know how to get to the heart of the issue, Peter. That was the most difficult thing for me to deal with, to come to grips with. I've met thousands of people across the CBC since I've become president, and the people is what makes this organization what it is, and the notion of leaving while there's a major problem ahead. Was not something that I was very comfortable with. In fact, I was and continue to be extremely uncomfortable with that. However, I should point out that for 95-96, there is no immediate crisis, that the budget will be balanced, and while there will be the usual belt tightening and adjustments here and there, we're not talking of a bloodbath. So there is time to plan for the more significant changes that have to be made. However, that was the single most difficult thing that I had to confront. But on balance, I also had to say to myself, I've been going across the country talking to the staff, talking to community groups,
talking to editorial boards. Everywhere I went when I was flogging
boards.
a book this year, you would just talk to the editorial board of the newspaper.
That's
and they were
right.
very impressed. I talked to people who were very impressed with what you said.
And I basically tried to sell everybody the notion that, yes, there is $100 million in cuts that we have to make. These are what people refer to as the Gzowski cuts, which were never canceled. They were simply deferred. And yes, we have cut a lot in the past. However, times are tough. And with goodwill, with some creative approaches, by rethinking how we do business, I think we can find this $100 million plus a little bit more, and on top of that, improve programming and bring back some services that we've canceled. I had tremendous difficulty convincing people about that at the beginning, but little by little, they came around. And when we reopened Windsor, when we did a couple of other positive things to improve programming here and there, I think people began to believe that maybe, just maybe, we can pull this off. I've invested too much of my psychological energy, credibility, preaching that kind of gospel for now to go back and say, well, it's no longer 120, it's now 350. I would have really great difficulty getting the courage to motivate people, and I think it's probably appropriate that somebody else tries to do that, unfortunately.
Both on and off the radio, I've been talking with political people in this country in the last couple of days. I mean, who isn't? We're all phoning each other. But one of the things that everyone is saying, it's a chorus, is these are politically the easiest cuts the government could make. There is no public support, and people now they often, this is very self-serving of me, so forgive me for a sec, because it'll sound that, because I'm going to say a lot of them are pointing at English television when they say that. There's just no support for English television, that it doesn't have a constituency, and it's not getting a support. I say it's self-serving because frequently the same people who say this exempt radio from what they did. But what do you feel about that? I mean, is it there?
Well, look, there's a number of things that are happening. First of all, you've got a terrible financial situation that is faced by the country, where the choices are becoming more and more difficult. Clearly, when people are confronted with the prospect of losing some social services that are part of the fabric of Canada, it focuses the mind, and priorities have to be established. And you get that kind of a thing where someone will say, well, I will do without some of the television programming, but I want to maintain whether it's the pension or the health care or what have you. That's part of it, without question. Secondly, I think that it is true that politically it may be easy to cut certain things, but I would think, and I'm not being critical of anyone, that political leadership requires the courage to do the right thing and not necessarily the popular thing. But third, I would challenge the notion that there isn't public support, and I will focus on English television. Now, I don't know how you measure objectively public support, but there's...
Well, people look at ratings. That's where they start.
Well, let's look at that. What people tend to focus on in the ratings is the percentage of people who watch English television at any one time, which, of course, has declined over the years because there's so much more choice available on the screen. Although this year, in spite of increased competition, we've stabilized those ratings, and if it hadn't been for the hockey strike, we would have actually gone up, which is a first in many, many years. So, but the problem with ratings is that it's not really the only measure, or the most valuable measure, or the most valid measure, I should say, of public interest. You have to look at how many people watch English television over a full week.
80%?
Yeah, you've got about 16 million people, and that's 1 million more than 10 years ago. So in terms of reaching the population, you've got an unbelievable reach. So I think that that's a bit of a red herring, and It should be looked at in context. And the other thing too is English television has made tremendous progress. When you look at the success of the Friday night schedule right now with Rita and Friends and Side Effects and the Air Farce, which of course came from radio, and primetime news, it's a service that I'm extremely proud of. And the real test of whether people value it or not is if it weren't there. I tell you, they would miss it.
And let me just quickly say, if you're joining us as we go, I'm in conversation with Anthony Manera, who is until the end of March 1995 the president of the CBC. Can I just, about a very few minutes left, I just want to bounce off some of the suggestions that came very clearly from the panel we had on yesterday, very clear as beginnings of a new direction for, again, I'll say, CBC television. Radio, of course, is perfect.
Of course.
Get out of the commercial business. Boy, 3 people made that very convincing case to me. Get out of it. Don't have a network that's financially motivated anymore. Don't do that.
Well,
it's $300 million of income, but don't do it, they all said. What about that?
Well, that's fine. The strategic plan that I presented to Parliament spoke about a substantial reduction of advertising revenue.
Oh, all of it.
That was linked even all of it. That was linked to finding some alternative source to replace it. And that alternative source does not appear to be on the horizon.
What about sports? Get out of sports, they said.
Well, let me just finish though
Okay.
on the advertising, because
Yes, President.
there's a financial reason, which is unless you can replace that money, to all of a sudden get out of it would be irresponsible. That's the first reason. But there's also a philosophic reason, and that is that I think advertising per se is not a problem until it becomes of such magnitude that it steers the kind of programming decisions you are making.
Danny Harvey says it does.
Well, I agree. That's why our plan recommended a reduction. But it doesn't mean going to zero. You can still have substantial advertising, but it has to be less than what we have now without the steering effect. Where we do have a steering effect right now is primarily in connection with U.S. programs that we put on the air, not because they're part of the mandate of the CBC, but because they bring in a lot of advertising at low purchase cost. So in that sense, I agree, but not going to zero. That is not realistic. That is not necessary. And I think it also would mean that you will lose one of the ways in which television connects with the audiences. It is not the only way. It is not the most important way, but it is one way. Now, you were done asking about sports, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sports. Okay, there's, again, 2 ways of looking at it. One of them is philosophic. The other is financial. Looking at it from a philosophic point of view, if you're a public broadcaster, you should be serving the public. An important part of the Canadian public is interested in professional sports. Therefore, unless you do have a certain amount of professional sports, you are not serving the public. That's my view from a philosophical perspective.
Well, those sports are available elsewhere.
Well, that may be. That may be. Although, again, there are different views on that in terms of the kind of coverage that the CBC provides. Now, look at it from a financial point of view. Let's say we get out of pro sports. A lot of people have made light of the fact that we make a small profit. It's not a huge amount of money, but besides the profit, it makes a tremendous contribution to overhead, and that overhead will still be there. So from a financial point of view, to get out of pro sports would make the financial problems of the corporation much worse. We've estimated between $70 and $80 million. So whichever way you look at it, getting out of pro sports doesn't make sense, although one can always debate whether there should be a little bit more or a little bit less. But as a general policy, I think it's a non-starter.
We're right out of time, which has nothing to do with anybody cutting anything. It's just the way we work. Who are you mad at?
I'm not mad at anybody.
Really?
No, I don't have time to get mad, and I don't think it's a very productive emotion. I'm sad.
I think a lot of us are. Thanks very much.
You're welcome, Peter.